Hello, BookTube. We're continuing with our read-along of the Chronicles of Thomas Covenant. Me and a couple of other really good booktubers are doing a read-along of the first 6 of Stephen R. Donaldson's Thomas Covenant books. So the first trilogy and the second trilogy. We are ignoring the third trilogy. So we're reading one Covenant book per month from July until December. And my co-hosts of this event are doing the normal read-along thing. They're doing one video per month. But I couldn't stand to do that. So I was given permission to do a read-along of these books, just week by week. And that's what we're doing today. We are actually finishing the Illearth War, which is the second book in the first Chronicles of Thomas Covenant, the Unbeliever. That's what we're doing today. And this book, the series, chronicles the adventures of a person from our world, from the normal world, Thomas Covenant, who is a best-selling author. He's married. He has a young son. When he contracts leprosy in the first book, Lord Fowl's Bane, and his wife leaves him, and she takes their son, and he goes to a leprosarium and learns all about his disease, which can be deadly if it's not the sole focus of his attention. He has to pay attention to it all the time. He's lost feeling in his hands and feet. He's impotent, and he's much more vulnerable to casual infection. So he has to be careful and pay attention to his disease all the time. It has to be his foremost concentration. It makes him bitter, of course, and it also makes him an outcast. His town doesn't want him around. They send his groceries to his house at the outskirts of town. They pay his bills, so he doesn't have to come to town and do it. And at the beginning of Lord Fowl's Bane, he does. He goes into town anyway, because he'll be damned if he's going to let them unperson him in that way. And while he's in town, he collapses to the sidewalk. And when he wakes up, he's in a weird fantasy place called the Land. An idyllic place of abounding health and beauty, natural beauty. It's agrarian. It's very much like Middle-earth. And the Land is ruled over by lords at Revelstone. They are staff-wielding sorcerers who have been guarding the land against Lord Fowl, this totally evil Sauron-type being who wants to destroy and despoil the land, and who has lots of tools at his disposal to do that. Thomas Covenant is summoned to the land originally by a character named Drool, who is using a massively powerful artifact called the Staff of Law to do the summoning. But Drool doesn't know anything about the Staff of Law. He doesn't know anything about higher sorcery. He just has the power to do it. And he is advised by Lord Fowl from a distance and plucks Thomas Covenant out of our world, largely drawn to the white gold in Thomas Covenant's wedding ring, which he stubbornly wears even though his wife has left him. It's just an unusual source, kind of jewelry in our world. But in the Land, white gold is unique and incredibly powerful. It wields wild magic, a kind of chaos magic, to which everything is vulnerable, including Lord Fowl. But when Lord Fowl snatches Thomas Covenant away from Drool and gives him his mission to bring, a message to the Lords of Revelstone, he also tells Covenant, I know you don't have any idea how to use this thing, so you're no danger to me. And Covenant is bewildered, of course. He is firmly of the opinion that this is all a fantasy, that he's unconscious somewhere on the street and is making all this up. He not only believes that because he's never encountered anything like this before, he also believes it because he believes he has to. Because the land is so healthy that it's starting to make him feel again. It's starting to bring back his virility. It's starting to make him feel his hands and feet again. And that is exactly what he thinks the wish fulfillment dream of a leper would be. And that makes it all the more dangerous. So he adamantly refuses to believe that the people and things around him that he's seeing in the land are real. And in the course of his adventures in Lord Fowl's Bane, one of the manifestations of his not believing that everything is real is that he rapes a young girl named Lena. He feels his loins springing back to life, and one of his reactions is to knock a preteen girl to the ground and rape her. And that was a problem in Lord Fowl's Bane. I was wondering, when I was rereading it for this read-along, I was wondering what any of you would make of that, and whether or not you would want to follow this character for the rest of the book. Because it'd be bad enough if Covenant were just a jerk and were doing that, and maybe came to regret it. It's much worse because it doesn't seem like Donaldson realizes how great an offense it is. It's almost like Donaldson himself doesn't treat it seriously enough. Which is one thing if Covenant doesn't treat it seriously, but if the author doesn't treat it seriously, then you don't know what to do. And that proves true in the course of Lord Fowl's Bane. Covenant goes to Revelstone. He meets the Lord's Revelstone. He meets a giant, Saltheart Foam follower. The giants live in the far, far east of the land, to the north of where Lord Fowl has his headquarters, and they are visitors to the land. They came from over the sea and fell in love with the nobility of the lords and the beauty of the land, and so they stayed. And during the original wars, we don't see these stories, but during the original wars that the lords fought with Lord Fowl, one High Lord, the leader of the lords, his name was Kevin, decided that the only way to beat Lord Fowl was something called the Ritual of Desecration, where he basically destroys the land, hoping that the process of destruction will kill Lord Fowl as well. Now, Lord Kevin has accrued the loyalty of the people of the land. He's accrued the loyalty of his fellow lords. He's accrued the loyalty of the giants. He's accrued the loyalty of people called the Blood Guard, people called the Harukai, who lived high in the mountains of the land, originally marched down onto the lowlands to make war, and were so amazed by the nobility of the lords and the splendor of the giants and all, they decided instead to swear an oath of a vow of complete loyalty to Kevin. A vow with a capital V, where they summoned the magic of the land in order to make 500 of their number immortal and sleepless. And those become the Blood Guard, and they guard the lords of Revelstone. But when Kevin is planning desecration, he knows that no one is going to agree with his plan. So he takes the vast body of his mystical knowledge. Frida, do you want to come up here? Do you want to come up on camera? Huh? Come here. Come on, everybody wants to see you, baby. Come on. Come on. You can do it. Come on, baby. There you go. Right. Big jump. Big jump. Big jump. Come on. There you go. There you go. That's where you belong. Anyway, we don't. According to Stephen Donaldson's, this is a Sunday morning. A Sunday morning. Police sirens, ambulance sirens, warplanes overhead, explosions. A Sunday morning. Anyway. Kevin takes the whole mass of his mystical knowledge, which is enormous, and breaks it up into 7 different segments called wards. He gives the first ward of his lore to the giants and tells them to go home to Sea Reach on the far, far east of the land. And he buries the second ward in Mount Thunder, and we find the lords find that in the course of Lord Fowl's Bane. He also sends the Blood Guard away. He tricks them. He tells them that he has a mission and sends them away into the high mountains so that they won't be caught in desolation either. And then he enacts the Ritual of Desecration, and it doesn't work. It kills the land, it kills him, it loses the staff of law for 1,000 years, but it doesn't kill Lord Fowl. So this is the enemy that the lords still have to face, is that the message that Lord Fowl gives to Covenant to give to the lords is that he has returned, and that he plans to make war and on the land. And the lords are galvanized by this. But during the climax of Lord Fowl's Bane, Drool Rockworm, the character who summoned Covenant to the land, dies. And that's when we learn that if the person who summons you to the land dies, your summons ends. And so Covenant vanishes from the land and goes back to his own world. And in the hospital at the end of Lord Fowl's Bane, he realizes one last shocking detail, which is that despite the fact that he's been learning about the land and going on a quest with the lords of the land and learning about the Blood Guard and the giants for weeks, the doctors in the hospital, when he wakes up, tell him that he's only been unconscious for 4 hours. This gives us a strong indication that time passes differently in the land than it does in our real world. But then the book ends. And when the Illearth War begins, Covenant is restive. He's not sure what this dream is that he's imagined. And he decides to go out and hitchhike. He wants to be among people. Perversely, since they don't want him. And since all he's going to do is worry the whole time anyway. A passing truck driver gives him a lift to a nightclub. And When he's in the nightclub, his identity is revealed. The police escort him out of the nightclub and drop him off on the road, and he has to walk all the way home. And when he's at home, he gets a call from his wife, calling him just to talk. It's his heart is in his throat. It's everything he's always wanted. He trips on the phone cord. A great many of you who were born in 2000 in the 21st century are going to need to Google phone cord. You should do that. Imagine the power cord to your laptop, only that didn't pop right off when you touch it. A cord that you could tangle up and trip over. It used to be that phones were connected to walls that way. Covenant tangles his feet in his phone cord, trips and falls, and hits his head on his coffee table, causing a gouge on his forehead to bleed profusely. And at that moment, he is summoned to the land. Again. The summons this time comes from the High Lord Elena, who is the new leader of the Lords at Revelstone, and who, it turns out, Covenant finds in fairly short order, is Lena's daughter. He is Covenant's daughter by rape, who has gone to Revelstone, studied, 40 years have passed since he was last there, even though it's only been a tiny bit of time for him. 40 years have passed. Elena is High Lord of the Council. The Council includes lots of members, the Revelstone includes lots of people that he has seen before. Banner, for instance, the Bloodguard who was previously charged with his protection, is of course still there. The Bloodguard don't age. Banner is immortal and takes up his job right away to be Covenant's guardian. Also Lord Moore, who was a much younger man when Covenant first met him in Lord Foul's Bane, is a lord and also a seer and an oracle, someone who has unwanted visions of the future. And there's also someone else there. There's Hyle Troy, who is a man from our world. He's a man from Covenant's world, who was ineptly summoned by a novice at Revelstone, who turns out to be Lena's mother, who died in the attempt. And because the summons was inept, and because the summoner died while the summons was happening, Hyle Troy doesn't vanish back to our world. Instead, he's stuck in the land. He's never going back. Just a combination of things, this combination of random coincidences have left him there. But it turns out that his presence has been a great boon to the Lords, because they have come to trust his tactical and strategic awareness. He was an expert war planner in our world. And he has decided that sorcery is one thing. Fine. But, I mean, the Lords have been studying the first and second wards of Lord Kevin that they have. The High Lord Elena has mastered the Staff of Law. So they're, in some ways, more powerful than they've been in quite some time. But Troy is putting his loyalty in militarily defeating Lord Foul. He's been building up the Lord's military defenses, and he's worked up a strategy that employs the topographical features of the land to defeat Lord Foul when pitched battle comes, which he is destined to do. It's not long in this book before word comes that Foul is on the march. But before that word comes, something else comes. A being called Amok. Apparently a young man, but he can appear out of thin air, and he seems ageless. And he was created by High Lord Kevin as a doorway to the 7th ward of Kevin's lore. Not the first, not the second, but all the way to the 7th, the end, the pinnacle of Kevin's lore. Amok thinks that the Lords summoned him because they have a relic called the Krill. It's a dagger-type device with a gem in its pommel, and it has been just a dormant thing. It's been like dead ice until it comes within proximity of Covenant's white gold wedding ring, in which case it blazes to life. And that signals Amok to come to Revelstone. It's only when the Lords tell him, we don't know anything about this device, we didn't activate it intentionally, your summons was an accident, that Amok is horrified and disappears. He reappears later in a different location and says, I have been traveling the length and breadth of the land, and I've seen the need. I see now that although you didn't intend to summon me, you may be able to still use me. I still may be able to help you, but I can't just outright give you what you want because I was made to answer certain questions and act in certain ways, and I can't do otherwise. So you're going to have to learn a lot about this ward that I am the doorway to before I can even help you with it. This is very frustrating to the Lords, especially Elena. She feels like she's that close to a weapon that might actually help them against Lord Foul. Elena has a deep, abiding fascination, almost an obsession, with High Lord Kevin Landwaster. She believes, for instance, as she tells Covenant in the section that we read last week, that if Kevin were alive again, she believes that he could defeat Lord Fowl easily, despite the fact that Fowl has not only his own immense magical powers, but also something called the Illearth Stone, hence the title of this book. A giant, malevolent stone that can be used to commandeer all sorts of natural forces, that can be used to twist all sorts of natural laws. And Fowl not only has mastered the stone, but he's mastered it to such a degree that he's been able to splinter it into 3 pieces and use it, hand those 3 pieces out to his 3 favored lieutenants, all of whom are ravers, disembodied spirits who can take over bodies and make them do Lord Fowl's will. When ravers are empowered by fragments of the Illearth Stone, there's no one they can't overcome, including giants, as we saw in the last segment that we read. Ravers have overcome 3 giants and bent them to Lord Fowl's will, a thing that previously anyone in the land would have thought was completely impossible. We learn about the fate of the giants, the horrible fate of Sea Reach, and the death of the giants in the land in the last segment that we were reading. The various embassies that are sent out with lords and bloodguard to find out about the giants come back with horrifying news. The lords don't survive, and the bloodguards who do return have only bad news. That Fowl has awoken all sorts of evil to the east of the land, and that the giants are destroyed, except for 3, who are marching on the land at the head of enormous armies. And one of those enormous armies is the one headed into the center plains of the land that is Hyle Troy's main concern. That's the army he has been training himself and his warriors for years to defeat. But he's never seen it. He's only ever heard rumors. He's been guessing. He's been estimating what he'd be up against. And at the climax of the chapters that we read last time, he climbs to the highest point in the land and looks. He has incredibly superior vision and is able to see across vast distances. He sees Lord Fowl's army, and he sees that it's too big for him to do anything about. None of his plans will work. None of his carefully laid traps will work on an army that's 100 times bigger than his own forces. He comes up with a desperate plan that involves running with his army to the last remaining remnant of the gigantic forest that once upon a time covered the entire land, upper land, the parts that the lords have always lived in. Once upon a time, that forest was immense, and it was sentient, and it was ruled over by a forestall, Keor Wildwood. Hyle Troy is convinced by what he's learned from the lords that the forestall is still alive, and might be so hungry for a raver, forestalls hate ravers, that he'd be willing to give Troy's army safe passage through the forest if that army would then immediately be followed by a raver and his army, which the forest could then destroy. And that is what happens at the climax of the storyline that we finished with last time. High Lord Elena and Covenant and Banner and the Bloodguard who is guarding High Lord Elena are not with the army. Hyle Troy's army has suffered with the lords, Lord Moram, all the other lords. They have suffered grievous harm, decimation. Almost all of them are gone by the time they get to the forestall's doorstep. But High Lord Elena is not with them, because at one point in the army's march to meet Lord Fowl, Amok appears again and tells them what I mentioned, that I have been looking at the land, I've seen there's a need, I would help if I could, provided you can meet me halfway. I am made so that I can only give you so much help. At one point in that exchange, Amok is made to reveal that he knows where the 7th Ward of High Lord Kevin's lore is, and that he can take someone there. High Lord Elena immediately decides that she will go. She has the Staff of Law. She has the greatest chance of making any sense out of it. There's no reason to send a military detachment. There's no war up in the mountains where they're going. Instead, she takes just her Bloodguard, and she asks Covenant to come along, and he goes, so Banner goes with them. So it's 4 of them, headed off into the mountain. And Donaldson makes the choice to split the narrative. He doesn't vary from one to the other. He does a Tolkien-esque split of the narrative. So the huge chunk of this book that we get in the middle is the story of Hyle Troy and Lord Moram and the physical fight, the war against Lord Fowl and his army. Very little sorcery involved. Instead, it's just a much smaller army running and being decimated as it turns to hold off a much larger army. Very gripping military science fiction, or military fantasy, however you like. Military fantasy is actually fairly rare, and that's what we get in the middle part of this book. That story ends with the plan succeeding. Our characters are wounded, they're exhausted, they're devastated, there are hardly any warriors left, but it did succeed. The Raver was destroyed, and his army was destroyed. And Carol Wildwood, the Forrestal, wants a bargain. He wants to be paid for his services. But he hasn't named his terms yet. And just as he's about to, our characters see coming up towards them, in the landscape, two figures, who they immediately recognize as Banner and Thomas Covenant. No High Lord Elena and no High Lord Elena's Bloodguard, and that's it. We don't learn anything about that, and because that segment ends. And then the segment that we're reading today is the final segment of the book, which follows High Lord Elena and Covenant up into the mountain. So we don't get any of the war in this chapter. We get their quest with Amok up into the mountains, which confuses Covenant at first. By this point in the book, very alarmingly, Elena has fallen erotically in love with him, with her father, calls him beloved, kisses and caresses him, and is not exactly rebuffed. Not in the way that... The weirdness of the sickness, the perversion of Covenant raping Lena in the first book and Donaldson not seeming to make a big deal out of it is actually made worse in this book by Covenant kind of entering into a romantic tension with his daughter by rape, with her knowledge. But we don't have to stress that. That is not, fortunately, that is not very much stressed in this book. It's an element that it's here, and it's utterly unavoidable. It sticks out and is really arresting. But they go up into the mountains. They are following. Amok is leading them towards the 7th Ward, high in the mountains overlooking the land. And the whole time that they're going, and Covenant and Elena are getting to know each other better, and the weather's getting colder, Covenant is a little disturbed. Something about it doesn't make sense. Why the Bloodguard, who are sworn to protect the Lords, would send only 2 of their number on this mission? One, the Bloodguard who's sworn to protect Elena anyway, and Banner, who's sworn to protect Covenant anyway. Why only those 2 going up on a quest into the mountains? Covenant actually says to him, well, aren't mountains dangerous? And Banner says, there are eagles, tigers may hunt in passes this low, there are landslides and snowstorms, mountains are perilous. And this just confuses Covenant all the more. If that's true, then why only 2 Bloodguard? And at one point, again, the question comes up, it's bothering him, it's nagging at him. And Banner says, well, High Lord Elena, she's High Lord of Revelstone, and she holds the Staff of Law. She is easily defended. Still doesn't strike Covenant as right. And at one point, there's a landslide. Elena loses her beloved horse. There are more and more frustrations. And finally, Covenant's had enough. And he turns on Banner in a scene that I want to read you at a little bit of length because I think it's amazing. It's also a little doorway, a little window into an alternate version of this whole narrative that I think would have been better. But we'll get to that. I want to read you this. It's a trifle long, but I was thrilled when I first read this 50 years ago. Because Covenant turns to Banner and says, how old are you? And we are the Bloodguard, Banner replied. Our vow was sworn in the youth of High Lord Kevin's lordship. Before the desecration? Yes. Before Kevin found out that Fowl was really an enemy? Yes. And you personally, Banner? How old are you? I was among the first Harukai who entered the land. I shared the swearing of the vow. That was centuries ago. Covenant paused before he asked, how well do you remember, Kevin? Step softly, Elena cautioned. Do not mock the Bloodguard. Banner did not acknowledge her concern. He answered the unbeliever inflexibly. We do not forget. I suppose not, Covenant sighed. What a hell of a way to live. For a moment he gazed away toward the mountain, looking for courage. Then, with sudden harshness, he went on. You knew Kevin when he made his wards. You knew him and you remember. You were with him when he gave the first ward to the giants. You were with him when he hid the second in those bloody catacombs under Mount Thunder. How many times did you come here with him, Banner? The Bloodguard cocked one eyebrow fractionally. High Lord Kevin made no sojourns to Riven Rock or Melanchurian Skyware, which is where they are standing right at that moment. That answer rocked Covenant. None? His protest burst out before he could stop it. Are you telling me you've never been here before? We are the first Bloodguard to stand on Riven Rock, Banner replied flatly. Then how? Wait, hold on. Covenant stared dizzily, then hit his forehead with the heel of his hand. Right. If the ward is some kind of natural phenomenon like the Illearth Stone, if it isn't something put here, then Kevin wouldn't have to come here to know about it. Lorik or somebody could have told him. Lorik could have told anybody. He took a deep breath to steady himself. But everybody who might have known about it died in the desecration, except you. Banner blinked at Covenant as if his words had no meaning. Listen to me, Banner, Covenant went on. A lot of things are finally starting to make sense. You reacted strangely. When Amok turned up at Revelstone that first time, you reacted strangely when he turned up at Revelwood. And you let the High Lord herself follow him into the mountains with just 2 Bloodguard to protect her. Just 2, Banner. And when we end up stuck here in this godforsaken rock, Morin, the other Bloodguard, has the actual gall to apologize for Amok. Banner, you should at least have told High Lord Elena what you know about this ward. What kind of loyal do you think you are? Elena cautioned Covenant again, but her tone had changed. His thinking intrigued her. We are the Bloodguard, Banner said. You cannot raise doubt against us. We do not know Amok's intention. Covenant heard the slight stress which Banner placed on the word no. To his own surprise, he felt a sudden desire to take Banner at his word, leave what the Bloodguard knew alone. But he forced himself to ask, No, Banner? How can you not know? You've trusted him too much for that. Banner countered as he had previously. We do not trust him. The High Lord chooses to follow him. We do not ask for more. The hell you don't. His effort at self-compulsion made him brutal. And stop giving me that blank look. You people came to the land, and you swore a vow to protect Kevin. You swore to preserve him, or at least give him your lives, and the lords at Revelstone until time itself came to an end, if not forever. Or why are you bereft even of the simple decency of sleep? But that poor desperate man outsmarted you. He actively saved you when he destroyed himself, and everything else he merely believed in. So there you were, hanging from your vow in empty space, as if all the reasons in the world had suddenly disappeared. And then you get a second chance to do your vow right when the new lords come along. But what happens? Amok turns up out of nowhere, and there's a war on against Foul himself. And what do? You let this creation of Kevin's lead the High Lord away as if it was safe and she didn't have anything better to do. Let me tell you something, Banner. You don't positively know Amok. You may have learned some kind of distrust from Kevin, but you sure as hell understand what Amok is doing, and you approve. The abrupt ferocity of his own yell stopped him for an instant. He felt shaken by the moral judgments he saw in Banner. Thickly, he continued, Or why are you risking her for the sake of something created by the only man who has ever succeeded in casting doubt on your incorruptibility? Without warning, Amok appeared. The youth's arrival startled Covenant, but he took it as a sign that he was on the right track. With a heavy sigh, he said, Why in the name of your vow, or at least simple friendship, didn't you tell the High Lord about Amok when he first showed up? Banner's gaze did not waver. In his familiar, awkward, atonal inflection, he replied, Lord, we have seen the desecration. We have seen the fruit of perilous lore. Lore is not knowledge. Lore is a weapon, a sword, or a spear. The Bloodguard have no use for weapons. Any knife may turn and wound the hand which wields it. Yet the lords desire lore. They do work of value with it. Therefore we do not resist it, though we do not touch it, or serve it, or save it. High Lord Kevin made his wards to preserve his lore, and to lessen the peril that his weapons might fall into unready hands. This we approve. We are the Bloodguard. We do not speak of lore. We speak only of what we know. Covenant could not go on. He felt that he had already multiplied his offenses against Banner too much, and he was moved by what Banner said, despite the Bloodguard's flat tone. But Elena had learned enough to pursue his reasoning. Her voice was both quiet and authoritative as she said, First Mark, Banner, the Bloodguard must make a decision now. Hear me. I am Elena, High Lord by choice of the Council. This is a question of loyalty. Will you serve dead Kevin's wisdom, or will you serve me? In the past, you have served two causes, the dead and the living. You have served both well, but here you must choose. In the land's need, there is no longer any middle way. There will be blood and blame upon us if we allow corruption to prevail. And confronted in that way, Banner and Morin agree to give High Lord Elena the name that they need, the very name of the ward that they've been looking for, the thing that will allow Amok to lead them to this highest ward of Kevin's lore. The Bloodguard knew that name all along. They just wanted the process to unfold the way it will, as opposed to giving anyone any kind of advantage. And in the wake of that scene, once Amok has been given the piece of information that he needs to make him help, he does help. He takes the party to the heart of the magic that fills the land, which is a stream. It's in the middle of a mountain, and it's a stream of purified earth power. And the person who drinks from that stream will have the power to speak a command. And anything in the natural world that is encompassed by that command must obey. Animate, inanimate, living, dead, doesn't matter. The power of that drink is so great that no one can drink more than once, and the power of that drink is so great that if you don't speak a command right away, you'll be burned up and dead. It's not like you're going to have that drink and then have that ability to just walk around and think about it. It has to be a quick thing. High Lord Elena decides to do that, and she has one command in mind. A command that we've already seen. We've already seen her. I'm assuming that if you're in the 4th week of a read-along here, you don't have to worry about me spoiling any key details. She's already revealed to Covenant that she believes that High Lord Kevin could easily defeat Lord Fowl, if only he were back alive in the present awareness of the ritual of desecration. That if he could somehow stand in the land again, he could defeat Lord Fowl easily. When she has the power of command, she summons him to do just that. And it's a defeat. It's a major, major defeat. It isn't just that High Lord Kevin does not defeat Lord Fowl. It's that the command plays right into Fowl's hands in the long term, which is something that Covenant had warned Elena about earlier in the chapters that we're reading today. He had said, whatever is going on here, Fowl must want it to happen. Whatever you're planning on doing is going to play into his hands. Just walk away. Don't do anything. It turns out that leper's advice was perfectly accurate. And so the contrivances of the plot eventually end up, this segment that we're reading eventually brings us to where the last segment ended. It brings us to Banner and Covenant away from the mountains, alone, with no Morin and no Elena, walking up a hill towards Morim and Heil Troy and the Forestall. And that's where the story ends. The Forestall. Troy is furious that Covenant is not helping. He believes that if Covenant tried, he could use his white gold wedding ring. He could use the wild magic that is the land's only real hope. And he wants to use it himself. Covenant actually gives him the ring. And Troy, it says, go right ahead. And Troy is about to use the ring himself when the Forestall exacts his price. He reminds them, you are to pay a price to me. And the price is, I want you, Heil Troy, to replace me. I want you to become my new apprentice. I want you to change into a Forestall. And Troy is taken. He's transformed against his will. And just as that's happening, Covenant starts to vanish. Morim points it out, that Covenant is leaving the land. That's how they know that the person who summoned him is dead. And Covenant wakes up. He's on the floor of his living room. There's dried blood on his forehead. There's dried blood on the rug. He's been unconscious for a while, but the dawn is coming up. He's been unconscious all night, but he's back at home with the dead phone on the coffee table and everything exactly as it was. And that is the end of the Illearth War. A massive, epic installment in this series. An installment that I think, leaving aside the question of Lena and Elena, leaving aside that whole psychosexual, sexual predation, sexual crime question, if we leave that aside to the extent that we can, even at the end of this book, Covenant is sure that Lena's mother is upset with him because he didn't save the wraiths of Andaline. And it's not just that he doesn't realize that Lena's mother is mainly upset with him because he raped her daughter. It's that clearly Donaldson doesn't think that's his worst offense. So even at the end of this book, that is still there, but I believe this book makes it at least as palatable as it can be, because the narrative splits. We are dealing with Hyle Troy. We are dealing with Lord Moram. We are dealing with the quest up in the mountain. We had a lot of chances to distract us from Thomas Covenant himself in the course of this book, and we also get that what I mentioned, that magnificent military fantasy, two armies going at each other, and the exact logistics involved in each. That is something that, unlike so much in this book, we don't get in Lord of the Rings. We don't get anything like that in Lord of the Rings. Hints and vague intimations added, but not the kinds of specifics that we get here, because we have someone from our world thinking about it, because we have Hyle Troy thinking about it. I think that plus the emphasis on narrative here. There are a number of chapters in here that are just people telling stories. I think that Donaldson does that really well, and I think if you combine all of that stuff, the lack of an emphasis on Covenant himself, the real world war that's happening, the emphasis on the narrative of people telling stories, I think those things combine to why I reread this book so often, why I like it so much. Despite the problematic, to use the 21st century word, despite the problematic elements, I think the reason why I go back to this so often is because of the repeatable chapters. And the most repeatable part, the part I love the most, the part I read to you, because it's Thomas Covenant, an emissary from our world, someone who's not taking this fantasy world for granted at all, turning it on its head and examining it in a way that the people in that fantasy cannot. They will not question the Bloodguard's loyalty. They will not question the wisdom of Kevin Landwaster. They will not think about any of that in the way that someone from our world would think about it. And it gives you a glimpse of what Covenant might have been. These books might have been about a Tolkien-esque style fantasy being interrogated by a person from our world on our terms. That is what happens in some of the best bits of this book, whether it's Hyle Troy or Covenant doing the examining, and it's a glimpse of what might have been if Covenant were only a jerk instead of a jerk and a rapist, an unapologetic rapist, a monster. If he were only a jerk who questioned everything around him, that might have made, I think it would certainly have made for a better book. But we'll deal with the book we have. So we're done with the Illearth War. Sorry about the length of this video. I've reread this book so many times, I don't think I could have made this any shorter. But we're done with the Illearth War. That concludes the Illearth War. I, of course, want to hear from you everything that you think about it now that you're done with it. Did you, for instance, my main question is, do you see what I say, that this is so much more enjoyable book than Lord Foulsbane? And keep in mind, unlike my co-host, we are going to continue with this read-along. So we are going on to to The Power That Preserves, which is the next book in this series. This is the concluding book in the first trilogy. And we're going to be reading this in September. And we're going to be reading 5 chapters a week. Because this is, I believe, 21 chapters long. Yes? 21 chapters long. So we're going to read 5 chapters a week of The Power That Preserves, starting next week. So we will start this book next weekend. This video's gone on way too long. Let me know what you think of the Illearth War. We're done with the Illearth War. Tell me all about it. And I will wrap this up for now, and we will resume next week. Thank you, Book 2.